Hello.
Hi.
Happy Easter. Just wait a few more minutes.
There we go, much better now. Okay, you can go away now.
I want to hear.
No, you don't get to.
Hi, everybody.
Say hi.
Hi.
Hi. Happy Easter.
You too.
I was talking to the other ones.
I'm talking to the other one, but no way.
At the camera. Because that's a lot of concern.
I will be muting everyone for this because it's just going to be me talking.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Just going to wait like 5 minutes or so because it's Sunday morning.
You've heard. 5 minutes.
What are you doing?
Muting.
Happy
this.
Easter, everyone.
I can talk.
Happy Easter, Barco.
Oh, it's Romeo. I'm just using my brother's computer.
So give it 5 minutes or so. So get up and stretch your legs. I'll be muting everybody. Another couple of minutes just for any late comers or people having issues. Hi, Tammy.
The worst thing that Ada Lovelace would be if she put coronavirus and
Ida, just want to go somewhere else this morning, yeah?
Right, so I think we can get started. Just before we start, I'm going to mute everybody But if you want to stop and ask me something or go over anything, you can unmute yourself. It just stops the video flicking from you to me every time somebody makes a noise.
What's that?
Okay, so thank you everybody for coming. What I wanted to do today was, for the first topical science, obviously, with the main topic, the reason that we're here was coronavirus, but present it in such a way that it didn't induce fear, that it answered some of the questions or explain some of the things you might be seeing in the media, as well as giving you a background on what a coronavirus is and what a virus is. Hopefully what I've put down is at an understandable level for everybody. So I am recording this, and I will be uploading it. If you have any issues with that, please let me know. But we'll just get started. If you would like to ask a question, you can unmute yourself on the screen and just ask a question. Okay. So what I will be discussing, scientific facts and formal advice from the World Health Organization and other health bodies. I am not a medical doctor, I'm not a public health expert. So I'll be sticking to what I know. Won't be going through things like 5G and conspiracies. I can't give medical advice, I'm not a medical doctor, and anything really that's outside my area of expertise. So obviously so what we're seeing colloquially referred to as coronavirus is actually a particular strain of coronavirus called COVID-19, which is causing the disease of COVID-19 at the moment. So you might have heard in the news or seen in the news or read it regarding the word pandemic. So pandemic is a virus or a disease outbreak that has the potential to cause economic and health repercussions, not just in a localized area, which we would consider that endemic because it's to a localized area. A pandemic goes all around the world, or to a large portion of the world, causing a great amount of economic and health stress. So the 1918 Spanish flu was a pandemic. You may have heard of that. It's been in the news, lots of comparisons. Basically, after World War I ended, everybody traveled from the war zones back to their countries, and so this allowed this strain of flu to go all around the world. Infected, I think, 500 million people, or a third of the world's population at the time. Swine flu, you guys probably predates most of you. Your parents would know what swine flu is. And now we have COVID-19. So, I'm sure some of you have heard of Ebola or you've seen it on a movie. But it was not a pandemic. It's been in about 4 or 5 movies as a pandemic, but it is localized to Africa. My computer works again. So there's certain things that a virus needs to be able to do to cause a pandemic. And it's this very, very finite line between infectiousness, so its ability to infect people. If a virus doesn't infect many people, then it's probably not going to become a pandemic. COVID-19 or coronavirus is very, very good at infecting people. The fatality rate. So a virus, I probably should have put this slide a bit later, but a virus relies on a host, so us. So if a virus breaks out and too many people that get it die from it, then there's no more people left to spread the virus. So that virus will die out relatively quickly. And what's called an incubation time, which is the time at which a person is infected and they show symptoms. So I think for coronavirus, they say it's 7 to 14 days. And that is why in the news, you've seen anybody coming from another country or state to state now, or even places within states, they have to self-isolate for 14 days. Because if they do have the virus, we will find out within 7 to 10 days, and we know if after 14 days you're symptom free, then we know you don't, and you're safe to go back out. So that's why you might have seen people needing to self-isolate. I had to do it when I came back from the UK, and with a 2-week-old child, it was not a huge amount of fun. And obviously there's other more complex issues that come to play in there, but we're not really going to. So to sum up this, and to look at COVID-19, it has a really high infection rate. So the amount of people that one infected person can infect is really high. It spreads with relative ease in comparison to other viruses, but it has a short incubation time and a low fatality rate. So I hope I'm making sense with it. It needs to have all of these in some way to become a pandemic. So if the fatality rate is too high, it generally won't. If the incubation time is too short, then we know straight away when someone's infected. Something like Ebola has an incubation time of up to 90 days in some point. So you can be walking around unknowingly spreading something for 90 days. Thankfully, COVID-19, sorry, I keep pressing the screen, has a relatively short incubation time and a relatively low fatality rate. We'll get onto that later. So coronaviruses, every time someone says, I've got a cold, and the doctor says it's a viral cold, it's probably made up of another coronavirus. I'll make a point to stipulate that. There's about, I think, 7 or 8 different coronaviruses, including COVID-19. So I'm just talking about coronaviruses in general. COVID-19 is new and is not included in what I'm talking about just here. So again, your parents might have known about SARS, which is severe acute respiratory syndrome, which was in Southeast Asia, 2009, 2003, and MERS, which is Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. So they're what's called, and this is a really important one, that's called a zoonotic virus. So they generally start in animals and they come to humans, and they can make the cross and the leap back and forth with relative ease. And that's why you see in the news that it started in bats or it started in any kind of animal. So the name coronavirus comes from these crowns on the outside of the viral capsid, as it's called. So yeah, that's why it's called coronavirus. It's not because of the beer. So a virus is measured on the nanoscale, which is, it's really hard to put this into just terms to understand, but it's basically just made up of DNA, it's basically just made up of DNA. And that is the basic building blocks of life. I don't really know how to, so that's a billionth of a meter. Again, made up of the building blocks of life, RNA and or DNA. So the interesting part about viruses is they're not alive. They are effectively things. They on the edge of being considered life, like bacterial cells, but at the same time they're not, because they don't produce waste and they require a host to survive. So a host can be an animal or a human or any kind of anything that has a cell. So viruses can infect bacteria as well in some cases, but they must have a host. If they don't have a host, they die. They cannot replicate themselves. Yeah, so again, not considered alive. I'm sure everybody's heard of the sort of the theory of evolution, and that we've evolved over time from wherever we came from to now. Viruses can mutate and adapt and evolve many, many, many times quicker than anything else. So that's why viruses pop up very quickly, and oftentimes why they disappear very quickly. And you can get an animal virus only in animals, and then it quickly mutates, and then it's in humans, and then we have to try and stop it. That's basically what's happened here. Again, they're not alive. You might have heard of getting like strep throat, which is caused by Streptococcus bacteria, which is it's a throat infection, but you can also get throat infection from viruses. So very, very different, and I'll go through a little bit of what that means. So when you say you get a normal cold or flu in wintertime, that virus is basically hijacking your body to spread it, to what's the word? Replicate itself and then spread itself to the next host. So actually host immune responses are to create mucus and to cough. So if you've got someone with a virus who's coughing and is producing mucus, then they're probably going to spread that virus. There's other ways, but we'll stick to those two for now because they're the simplest ways. Again, you've got enveloped and non-enveloped viruses. Well, yeah, so the seasonal flu, which changes every year, is testament to that rapid mutation. So you can have the flu 2 years in a row, but it will be vastly different, and they can cross species barriers, so that as zoonotic viruses can. So enveloped, you can see here, you've got this envelope here. This is made up of a piece of the envelope that actually surrounds the human cells. So these viruses are very sneaky in that they will trick the immune system and trick the body and other cells into thinking that it's actually a human cell when it's obviously not. And then you have these non-enveloped viruses. So this is the DNA or RNA like we have, and then they have this little encapsulation, and then you've got enveloped viruses, but these do not have an envelope. So where the coronaviruses are enveloped viruses. Again, just repeating myself. They're more difficult to kill in some ways because they've got protection, but also simpler. Again, SARS, MERS, and COVID-19 are all enveloped viruses. So there's a big distinction that we make here. So when this virus enters the cells, it uses that cell, our own machinery, to reproduce, to basically to make copies of itself. And then through this process of budding, they create an envelope. So effectively, when the immune system of our body sees these viral particles, it sees itself. And that's why it's so difficult. Non-enveloped, again, examples. One big difference is that they will actually just reproduce inside the cell until it, I say it explodes. The term is it lyses the cell. And this allows all of those viral particles to escape. So it's kind of like, I don't know, less fancy this way, and this way's a bit more, this way to sort of get in and bash everything open, whereas this one's a bit more thinking involved. So again, this is how you will become infected. So viral particles enter the body through mucous membranes, so the throat, the lungs, sometimes the eyes, the mouth. They enter the cells, like we just spoke about, and begin replicating themselves. Yeah, so again, just going over so they exit the cell. And because they've got this coating on them, they're basically allows them to attach to other healthy cells and infect it with the virus, which begins replicating itself. And that is the reason why someone with a virus can get ill quickly, is because that viral load, as we call it, how many viral particles have been replicated, is high, and it goes up exponentially each day until you eventually show symptoms. So you might start at day 0, you start with 10 viral particles. Day 2, it's 40. Day 3, so on and so forth, until you start showing symptoms. Now, they don't know what the viral load is for COVID-19. I think the evidence suggests that it's relatively high. Now, yeah. Again, it just goes around attaching itself to other cells, or the viral particles get into other cells and they start replicating. Yeah, so it will then go into the cells of the, they'll then go in, sorry, Evan has so much to ask a question. So Dylan's asked, do different strains of the virus replicate quicker? If there were other strains, it would depend what they were and what they mutated to. Again, I'll only comment on official advice, and the official advice that I read this morning is that there is still just one strain that is circulating. On a global level, there may be others at an endemic level in a country, but the current pandemic in COVID-19 is one strain. Again, I could be wrong. I will go back and read again, but from the last thing I read, it was just the one. Okay, so the body's next step is to then go into the respiratory tract. So every virus attacks different cells. Well, it doesn't really attack, it just goes into them. And it uses our body's own immune response. So we were talking about coughing and mucus production. So the body, especially in the lungs, because it's really deep inside the body will mount a very big response against it. Again, we could probably do a whole uni semester on this respiratory tract immune system, so I won't go too deep into it. And again, swelling. So swelling is basically the body's way to get more blood and more pieces of the immune system into that area to fight off an infection or a virus. Fever. So fever is actually, again, it's another attempt by our body to bake the virus out. So viruses, if the body goes above about 38.5 degrees, and the virus isn't as good at replicating. So, but fever becomes problematic over 39.5 or 39.6, anything over 40 and you are in trouble. I had a 40-degree fever and I was hallucinating in the cold shower for a long time. So it is quite uncomfortable, but the body does do it for a reason. But if it becomes problematic, then it needs to be treated. And again, fluid buildup, making it difficult to breathe. So this response, so I'm trying to work on the distinction of what makes viruses unique. And if you look at a virus, it's not really attacking, or it's different from a bacteria or a physical break in the body, in that it's basically just causing the body to mount such a response that it harms itself. Again, so when you're talking about fluid buildup in the lungs and people being difficult to breathe, especially older people, they need to go into intensive care and possibly put on ventilators. That's, again, a whole nother month of talking if we really wanted to get into that. So I will leave that relatively simple as it is there. So again, we'll go back to it's a novel zoonotic virus, which means it's new, it's never been seen before, and we don't know what it did and we didn't know really what to do until it started infecting people. So potentially in bats at this point is the most likely based on the genetic analysis that's been done. So again, across what's called the zoonotic line, which is from species to species, humans to bats to humans via a random mutation. But that doesn't mean then that that first person that got it could then make someone else sick. So it would likely need to mutate again further. So we don't really know the timeline. When we talk about patient zero, like in the movies, it doesn't mean a lot. It's very difficult to find out the very first person who had this, and we likely will never know. And yeah, again, patient zero has not been identified. There's little evidence confirming that it started at a wet market in Wuhan, despite what the media says. It likely will never be proven where it came from in the beginning. You can make assumptions based on information, but that's not what science does. Science only works on some things that are confirmed, which is why I like it so much. So once the virus did get into humans and could then spread from person to person, because we have this globalized society of you can get planes anywhere, you know, and especially in Wuhan or in China, if it started there, you will get a very quick spread because their pathogens, you know, in those cities are so tight, and then they travel so much that it was only a matter of time really before it spread. I'm not going to comment on China's initial reaction and response, because again, that's outside of my area of expertise, but if you want to read about that, it is interesting. So part of now is some questions that I've had or things I've seen on social media that made me think, well, possibly I should, checking the time, answer, especially for kids. I think facts, and the reason I said fact from fear in the beginning is that when you understand something, you generally, it's easier to walk away from the fear. If you don't understand something, or you don't know why the government's doing something, or why we've been told this, then it's a lot easier to understand if you understand the science behind things, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but that's the way I look at things. So someone said it's not even as bad as the normal seasonal flu, because the normal seasonal flu has killed X amount of people. And, you know, yeah, sure, the seasonal flu will probably kill a lot of people this year, and does every year, but it doesn't have the potential to explode beyond what it's already doing. So I'll bring up my little, again, so the infectiousness of influenza viruses is not anywhere near what it is for COVID-19. So one person infected with COVID-19 left unchecked can infect significantly more people than the normal flu. The fatality rate is higher at this stage. Again, I'm only using information that we have now. Yeah, fatality rate is higher. So if something has the potential to infect a very large amount of people, even with a relatively low fatality rate, it still has the potential to be worse than the normal flu, especially in older people. Again, its incubation period is up to 2 weeks, so you can be walking around feeling fine, not knowing you're actually spreading the virus, which doesn't really happen with the normal flu, or doesn't happen to the same extent on the same level as the normal flu. Asymptomatic carriers, that's a bit of a big word, but asymptomatic is just people that are not showing symptoms but are still carrying the virus. This is why social distancing in children especially is important. I'll talk about that later, because they're finding a lot of children have tested positive but aren't showing any symptoms. So they're walking around and their parents don't know, or they don't know, and no one knows that they're actually spreading the virus. Okay, so Marco has just asked, why do older people have a higher risk of catching COVID-19 as opposed to children? So there's a couple of factors. The biggest one, which I'll touch on later on in this as well, is that as you get older, your immune function decreases. I think that begins at 50 is the agreed upon age that occurs. So anyone above 50 is at a higher, and every age group you go up from 50, you see an increase in the amount of people that that are dying. And also, if you don't have the immune system to fight it off in the first place, then you're more likely to get the infection. A healthy person has a much better chance of not becoming infected, so their immune system is just functioning a lot better. And if you've got other comorbidities or other diseases, illnesses, then you're more likely to become infected because you just don't have the capacity to fight it off in the very beginning. But I will touch on that a little bit later. So here we go, factors influencing infection, age. And those 0 to 19 are faring the best. There's only maybe a handful of cases under 9 and then under 19 again, which have seen deaths. Again, they don't really know why. That's something we have to figure out in time. That's just, could be one of those things, could be the way the virus is, it could be, I'm not even gonna attempt to try to figure it out. Anyone at 50 plus, there's reports in the media that the people that are dying in hospitals in Italy and Spain and the US, up to 90% of them have a comorbidity or another disease that they already had. Yeah, other illnesses. I think Italy, I saw something was up to maybe, I haven't confirmed that, but anywhere up to 99% of the people that were dying in hospital had a pre-existing condition. Again, socioeconomic, we can see what is happening in New York City at the moment. You've got 60 odd million people, 16 million people crammed into a tiny city with no sanitation, or very limited sanitation now. So they're the three. And if you work in healthcare, or you're disproportionately exposed to people that have the disease, like doctors, nurses, they are at a much higher risk of catching it. Basically, the more you're around people that have it, the higher your risk. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, who else is sick of washing their hands? Yes. I hope that after this, everybody sees the validity of washing their hands all the time. If you're studying science or you want to study microbiology, have a look at what actually grows on your hands. If you want to have a look on YouTube or the internet, where they do an experiment where they put their hand on an agar plate and then they grow what was on their hands, you'll want to wash your hands all the time, even after this, I can assure you. So the viral envelope is the reason that we keep washing our hands. Our best defense against catching COVID-19 is to wash your hands. Yeah, so we can break it down by either the hand sanitizer with 70% alcohol content or more, which breaks apart the outer fat layer. We can get like something like this. I had to drive around all day to find that after we came out of lockdown. So it has to be, well, the WHO said it has to be 70% or more. Hospitals will use 90% just to be safe. Or we physically and chemically break it down. So the fat layer is made up of basically fat and phosphate. And when you use soap, it breaks apart that layer, but you physically have to rub your hands together. I'm not going to demonstrate. And if you're at home, always use that. That is a more effective method than hand sanitizer. But obviously, if you're outside or out of your house, hand sanitizer is the best thing after you've touched things, after you've done your shopping, after you pick things up. Yeah, and then token picture on the end. So, can you get the virus even if you don't come in contact with an infected person? The short answer is yes. The best way is obviously stay at home, as much as possible. We all have things to do. We have things we need to do. We have to go food shopping. Wash your hands regularly. Cover your coughs and sneezes and avoid touching your face. This is the biggest one. If you don't touch your face, there's very little chance you can pass the virus from your hands into your mouth or into your nose or into your eyes. Do a little experiment now. For the next 5 minutes, physically hold your hands together and see how many times you want to touch your face, and you'll be shocked at us down there. And stay 1.5 meters away. So the big issue with respiratory viruses is that they come out of the body in, oh, pardon me. They come out of the body in these little globules, or I can't remember the bloody term now. Like they're just basically in fluid, and once they land on a surface, they stay there until they're wiped away, or until someone picks those up on their hands. Coronavirus is very hardy for an envelope virus. It can anywhere up to 72 hours on a hard surface. That's how long it can survive for. So when you're out and about, the best way is to just not touch anything, and anything you do touch, sanitize. If you go to shopping centers now or Woolworths, they'll have someone there sanitizing all the handles and baskets for you. You can do it yourself as well if you like. Yeah, again, best way to protect yourself from contracting coronavirus. If you've got clean hands, and the only way you can contract it, if you're following all the rules, is via your hand, then theoretically speaking, you should be really safe. So, yeah. So again, if you go outside the house, make sure you take hand sanitizer with you and do not touch your face. Social distancing, which is a big one in the news and probably one of the harder ones to do, especially when you're out and about. Transmission of the virus, remember the virus is in part basically particles of liquid that come out of the mouth and nose. So they will travel 1 to 1.5 meters before they hit the ground. Yeah, there we go. Virus travels through the air via droplets through cough, sneezes, and normal breathing. I want to make a big distinction here. When you go into the movies and you see those people walk around in spacesuits and suddenly it rips and all of a sudden they've got the virus, that doesn't really happen in the real world. An aerosolized virus is one that you can catch an infectious dose of the virus from particles in the air, and that is just not something that COVID-19 is shown to do. So although these particles travel through the air, the virus is not an airborne virus. I just want to make that distinction because that allows you to, you can go out just, well, there we go, as you can see, yummy. There you go. So everything we just discussed, it just comes out and it lands. Again, just because you come into contact with someone who's had the virus does not mean you will be infected. Obviously, with each time you come in contact, the greater your risk, which is why they tell you to stay at home. If you're not outside of your house or in a shopping center, then you can't get it. It's basically why they give you that advice. So here's a big one. It's mask and gloves. You'll see people walk around in goggles and they've got black gloves on, and you think, what on earth are they doing? There's not a lot of evidence. I shouldn't say no evidence. There's not a lot of evidence to suggest that a mask will reduce your risk of contracting the virus. Because it's not an airborne virus. The virus will land. What you'll see with someone wearing a mask is that they'll constantly adjust and touch the mask. So they're walking around touching things, and then they touch the mask, and then all of a sudden they've got viral particles in their face. Your likelihood of breathing in these viral particles, again, it's not an airborne virus, so your likelihood of getting an infection from breathing in these viral particles is relatively low. if not non-existent, but I won't use the term non-existent, I will just say low. The only people that should wear, basically, if you're having surgery and the surgeon is wearing a mask, that is likely to protect you, not the surgeon. So it stops the surgeon breathing stuff and germs out of his mouth into you. Same thing applies here. So you're caring for someone with COVID-19. Again, if you're constantly exposed to people, then you should wear a mask because it reduces your daily viral load. And I'll touch on what viral load is. It's basically a person needs to have a certain viral load in their body to be able to infect someone else. So need to be infected for a certain period of time, showing certain symptoms. So a medical professional who's dealing with people all day, every day, is an extremely high viral load. And that is why you'll see in the news and the media that doctors and nurses who get it, actually, they suffer worse for it because the viral load they start with is significantly higher than the viral load. The amount of virus they begin with is higher than the general public. So they generally have worse outcomes. Again, you're caring for elderly or susceptible people. It's just a little bit of extra. It basically stops you breathing out all those particles onto surfaces that they may touch. That's all that's going to do. Again, if you're walking around coughing and sneezing everywhere, then that WHO says you should wear a mask just in case. And to be fair, if you're walking around coughing and sneezing, you probably shouldn't be outside anyway. Again, masks are only effective if they fit properly. You've got spaces here usually with a mask. If it goes over your nose, you've got spaces here. So it has to fit properly, and it also has to be disposed of properly. And they're generally single use. If you start wearing them, it's like any kind of, I'm trying to think of, a filter. It will eventually just clog up or it'll get wet, and all of a sudden you're not being protected at all. And we are running out of masks and other PPE for healthcare. So unless you really need it, you should really be giving it to a hospital. But that's my personal opinion. Again, if you don't wash your hands properly and you're touching your face, then a mask isn't going to really offer you any. It's not really going to do much for you. Gloves. If you wear a pair of gloves, I'm stuttering, so I'm choosing my words very carefully. If you've got a pair of gloves on and you pick something up, and then you pick something else up, and then you touch your face, and then you pick something else up, the virus does not go through the skin. The only reason you should is if you have, maybe if you've got cuts on your hands. But again, it is not a bloodborne virus. So I would say you don't. Gloves make people less on it with washing their hands because they think they don't need to. And generally, if you wear gloves and you don't know how to take them off, or you don't double glove like we do in the lab and they do in healthcare settings, then you're only going to, whatever's on there is going to end up on your hands anyway. So I'll leave it at that with gloves before I start ranting too much. Why can't I just hug my friends? Again, using questions that people have sent me. Cute little girls there. The social distancing rules apply for kids, although they are disproportionately not affected by the virus in terms of infections and deaths. They are far more likely to be what's known as an asymptomatic carrier, which is, again, we've discussed that. So as much as we'd all love to have our kids playing together again, we just need to keep them apart, which is very, very difficult. Yeah, so, and if you've got asymptomatic carriers and they go and see our grandparents, because as we know from what we talked about earlier, they're disproportionately affected by COVID-19. So the last thing we want to do is take my 2-year-old out there to see my grandparents. We don't know he has it, and then all of a sudden my grandparents who have diabetes and all sorts of things are suddenly really sick. Again, why can't I visit nanny? Disproportionately affected. So most of our grandparents will have some kind of medical issue. I won't say all of them, most of them. And just going by their age, they will be affected more than anybody else. Again, this is because they need all the strength, and immune function begins to decline with age and with some certain comorbidities. So if they have, you know, we discussed earlier that they need to have really good immune function to fight off the virus, and if that's not there, then you know they'll have a worse outcome. So we just need to protect the older people and anybody that's vulnerable to it by just, you know, as much as it sucks, staying away. Again, we've all driven past empty playgrounds and thought, why can't I play on there? There's no one on there. The issue is COVID-19 is really hardy on surfaces. I've seen tests where they've found it up to 7-9 days, but the average so far is about 72 hours. If there's no sunlight and it's smooth plastic or smooth metal, then it's even worse. Again, social distancing with kids on a playground, I can't imagine how that would work. So yeah, we just need to stay away from them. Yeah, it's, again, for the adults, it's not easy to keep kids apart, especially on the playground. And as we discussed, kids can pass to each other without showing symptoms. So what happens now? So the current social distancing, I say lockdowns, we're not really in a lockdown, we're in sort of quarantine, social isolation really still. We haven't gone into lockdown. We need to stay in place for the short term. I don't know what the short term is, if that's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, that's not for me to decide. Yeah, so I think I'm on the Sunshine Coast and we've had one case in 8 days. And if we were to lift all these restrictions and everybody started mingling, there's still hundreds of people that have the virus. So if those people started mingling, we'd suddenly get a spike in cases. So we do need to adhere to these. I know it's boring and it sucks, especially with children, but it's for the good of everybody. So our growth number, which is the number of daily cases today compared to yesterday, is about 0.84. So that number needs to keep going down towards 0 for a consistent period of time before they will consider lifting the social distancing rules that are in place now. Yeah, so there is a magic number that the government will use, that once the number of cases, number of new cases, the growth number gets to, then we know what we've done has worked. Because when you're talking about this data, sounds UK coming out, data is king. So you're looking at long-term and short-term trends. What happens over 3 days is largely meaningless. You know, what happens over a week is a bit more. If it happens over 2 weeks, awesome, we're going down still. And then at a month, 60 days, 90 days, you can see a long-term trend. That's why when we have a drop in cases over a day, it doesn't mean a huge amount. If that drop continues over a week, then we know what we're doing is working. And from everything that is being shown, it does appear that all of this pain is starting to show, because we're not in the same situation as the UK, which where I just came from, and Spain, Italy. So what happens? So the best case scenario is the virus mutates a lot and we never see it again. It just disappears. It happened with SARS. There hasn't been a new case of SARS since 2004. And it was basically said it was going to be worse than this, but it did what viruses do, it mutated and it disappeared. Worst case, the virus mutates a little and enters circulation as seasonal flu. Probably not going to happen, but again, it's a possibility. What would happen afterwards? We do what's called antibody testing. So anybody that's had the virus, wasn't tested, anybody that's had the virus, anybody that wasn't tested, they will test everybody to test for an antibody. which is something the immune system makes to fight off the virus. So if we have this antibody in our body, in our blood, antibody in our blood, then we know exactly how many people were infected. And that allows us, from a public health standpoint, to look at the death rate, look at the fatality rate of the virus. You know, did the measures that we put in place work? Were they necessary? Were they over the top? Because this is really new for Australia. We haven't, aside from 1980, we have been relatively well protected from pandemics, and it will allow us for the next one to know exactly what to do. And obviously a vaccination program if we come up with a vaccine for the virus. So at current, I think there's one at UQ that is being tested. And basically, if the virus continues and stays on, then anybody that hasn't had the virus will be vaccinated first. And then we will have what's called herd immunity against the virus, and then basically it will die out of existence with time. That's the plan in very simple terms. But fingers crossed, it disappears. If not, then vaccination is the most likely route. Okay. Hi everyone.
Slide play.
Anybody else?
Hope that wasn't too dry.
No, I can't. He isn't Yura, Inka.
Right, that's it, everybody. I hope it wasn't too dry. I tried to make it as interesting as possible, but virology is not the most interesting subject in the world.
Sweet, thanks, Lou.